Well, thanks for having us. Like Ariella mentioned, we're going to talk about the customer journey, Consumerization. It was neat to see in one of the previous sessions, IDC, right? 66% of why people are going through the transformation has to do with a better customer experience. That's what we're all about. Everything that we do as a company, Jason and I have been doing this for a long time, probably an average of 40 years together combined, working in this space. And it's all about taking normally a very complex business, which you guys are all engaged in, and how do we make that easy? At the end of the day, it's about making it easy for your customers, and then in return, that should make an efficient business for you guys on the back end, not focusing on a lot of customer calls or complaints or issues, but people actually doing transactions with you on an easy perspective, hopefully increasing your customer satisfaction scores, and also hopefully in the end turn around to increase sales. Having said that, we have managed to collaborate with Gemalto for about 4 years as well in this space, worked on a couple of clients and been doing this. And so turning it over to you, Jason.
Yeah, it's actually really cool to be back here. I started my interactive career way back in 1994 over on Patrick Henry Drive for a little advertising agency that wanted to create a web group. Nobody really knew what HTML was back in those days, so it's definitely been a journey to watch the evolution of this space and see all the great things that are happening. Who thought about monetizing shower heads 20 years ago? So a quick survey, and this will just be the old school analog hands up in the air kind of survey. Any UX professionals with us today? All right, I can say whatever I want.
Okay, yeah.
Has anyone participated in a UX track on a project before? Good, all right. And how about people who have no idea what UX is at all?
Oh, we had a couple.
That's pretty good. I found that most people understand UX these days. It goes by a variety of different names. UX for user experience. Sometimes you'll hear customer experience when we're a little bit more focused on the business aspect. Sometimes it's called information architecture. It goes by a variety of names, but it all has the same overriding intention, which is to create that magical experience for your customers. A lot of people don't understand user experience and don't really understand why it's important, but a really simple analogy can sometimes make the little light bulb go off over your head. Moving day. So how many people here have moved from one location to another? Everybody's hand should be in the air. If you've done that before, then you understand user experience design. So think about that moving process. Did you create a plan, or did you just wing it? You probably created a plan. Did you define requirements? Were there certain things that you needed to have in order to get the job done, certain steps that you needed to take? Of course. Did you create logical groupings of things? That might sound odd, but it would sort of be the equivalent of packing your house and starting in the garage with the box of motor oil, and then putting your $450 shoes on top of that, putting some sour cream in there. No, you didn't do that. You created logical groupings, you put them all in the same box, you labeled the box. So what's in there? Pretty simple stuff. You might have even gone another step further and wrote instructions on the box for the movers when they get to the location, where does that need to go? You did all that stuff because imagine what would have happened if you didn't. I know lots of people with garages like that and they've never moved in their life, but yes. So simple logic here. You did all of those things because you knew what the end result would be if you didn't. The irony here, though, is that moving from one location to another, even if I moved from Half Moon Bay to Munich in Germany with a wife and a 1-year-old, big, complicated thing, but that's not nearly as complicated as dealing with any sort of software monetization issue where you're not dealing with physical objects that you can put in a box and put a label on it. You're dealing with invisible entities, things like entitlements. Somebody previously had said, oh, I feel great because I know what entitlement means. And So there's a whole language issue that you have to go through when we talk about software monetization or software licensing management in particular. So if we think about what is the high-level value for UX, it's user-focused. It seems pretty logical that you would talk to the people that would actually use the system that you're creating, but you'd be surprised how many times that actually doesn't happen. It's needs-based, so understanding the needs of all of the different types of users is critically important. There are customers that might be a part of that chain. There are internal employees that have to be a part of that chain. It runs across operations, marketing, every aspect of the enterprise. It needs to be prioritized. So one of the realities that we talk to our clients about is that not all customers are created equal. You may find that 20% of your customer base accounts for 80% of your overall revenue. So we need to prioritize the solutions that we deliver. And it needs to be evolutionary. From a business development standpoint, it would be great if we designed a problem that you would come back and hire us for later, but that's not what we do. So we try to think about it, where do you need to be 18 to 24 months from now? The bottom line with UX is that it saves you money. We can avoid a lot of costly errors. So we've talked a lot about these trends that are driving the landscape right now. I think digitization is probably a trend that we've beaten to death already. Everybody knows what that is. Consumerization is another trend that we've touched on a little bit, but it's a very important trend that's happening in the B2B space these days. So we're all consumers when we're not at work. We use digital products and services. When I go to work, do all of my expectations about those experiences or the quality of the interface that I'm going to use, do those go away? No, of course not. So we're dealing with people who are sophisticated, who have a high level of expectations when it comes to anything that you're doing from a software monetization standpoint being useful, accessible, and essentially meeting their needs and filling an objective within the organization. Self-service, another trend that we've talked a lot about. We've worked with a client, a big client, for the last 4 years, and that self-service aspect has been a huge part of their business strategy. And then minimalism. So we've kind of seen this evolution in the UI space, the user interface space, where things used to be a little over-designed in the past, and now today they tend to be a little bit more minimal. Why is that? Because most of the things that we design have to fit or work on a mobile device. There's just not the screen real estate available for a bunch of fancy interactions, transitions, things that are ultimately distracting anyways. So we're going to walk through the UX process. I'm going to throw some slides up here that will probably make people groan because there's so much content on them. We've actually put some handouts on the desks, or on the tables, I should say. So at the end of the presentation, you've got that little UX cheat sheet. There's no reason to take any notes or anything as we walk through this. So this particular UX process is a representative process. One of the things that is important to note about software monetization, especially software licensing management, is that there is no one-size-fits-all solution. So when we sit down and we work with clients, oftentimes we will modify this process for them so that it reflects their own individual organizational or customer needs. But as a representative approach, discover, define, create, and then critically test. So that's another area where we find clients often don't want to engage in testing. It adds time, cost, you have to recruit the subjects, but the payoff for doing that, again, is that we can save you money and avoid a lot of costly errors later. The discovery process is really about creating your software monetization DNA. So it's really understanding all of the aspects of your organization, your workflow, your customers, your internal employees that make you different from everybody else. Understanding that at a very detailed level allows us to create a strategy to bring all of these things together. Ultimately, UX is about integrating the needs of your business with the needs of your customers. It's pretty simple. User research, user personas are very important. Does everybody know what a persona is? A persona is a collection of needs, preferences, and behaviors that we use to segment and define the different types of customers or users that we need to serve. So when we start talking about this big project that we worked on, one of the things to point out is that we have a separate portal for customers, and we have a separate portal for channel partners and retail partners because they represent a different set of needs, a different set of preferences and behaviors. So we actually took our core interface and optimized that for those particular users. Stakeholder interviews. It seems like a very basic thing, but this is actually a critically important part of the UX process because it allows us to gauge the organizational alignment that you guys have internally. Is everybody working towards the same vision? Is everybody working towards the same set of objectives? Again, without those things, we're sort of throwing darts at a board, and that can get expensive and time-consuming. Competitive audits and internal process audits. The internal process audits are absolutely critical. Looking at all of your systems, being realistic about how useful they are, about how enabling they are in terms of getting your customers and your employees through a workflow and delivering a quality experience. The definition phase. So we take all of these insights that we've developed during the discover phase about your customers and about your business, about your objectives moving forward for the future, and we define this blueprint, if you will. So this is your software monetization blueprint. It's all of the things that we need to account for within the system. Use cases, functional requirements, content requirements, most importantly, metrics and KPIs. So how are we going to measure success at the end of the day? The create process. So this is where we create all the core UX deliverables. People ask me what I do for a living, and I tell them I make boxes. That's pretty much what wireframes and sitemaps and process flows, boxes and arrows. The sitemap really defines the overall structure and the organization. The process flow links all of those screens together in logical flows, things like registration, software activation, license renewals. Wireframes pull all of that information into a simple, basic picture that allows us to make sure that we've gotten all of the right content, features, and functionality on a given page. And then the functional annotations are really there for developers so that when they create and code this, they know exactly how the front end should behave. Testing. This is a big one. A lot of times clients will skip this particular phase thinking, well, it's probably an 80-20. We've got 80% of the things right. That little 20% we'll fix later downstream. That's certainly a way to go, but if that 20% that needs to get fixed represents a core piece of functionality. So if we're talking about software licensing management, if your activation flow is off, how useful is your platform at that point? Really testing that, making sure that we're meeting the needs of users. Over the course of the last 4 years, we've gone through innumerable numbers of tests with this client that we're going to talk about. Everything from testing micro interactions. So if I move the link over here or I call it a different name, we actually get an 80% boost in customer performance and ability to complete a task. The interesting thing is that eliminates a ton of calls to your call center, a ton of email support requests. So we'll talk a little bit about this client that we've been working with for the last several years, 4 years. It's a Fortune 100 company. If you've been alive for the last 40 years, you've owned many of their products. I'm not allowed to say who they are, but you all know who they are. We designed a customer web portal for them. That was job one. We started with that. Then we went and developed a channel partner and a retail partner portal. These guys actually took some of the advice that we gave them to heart. We rolled out a pilot program for 3 of their key channel partners. And we used that sort of isolated release to hone in on all the things that were problematic for those users. Things like activating on behalf of another person, managing large chunks of assets, entitlements, really getting to the granular level where we are testing all of these really critical components and making sure they work right before we actually let it loose in the wild. In the past, this particular company, when they made changes to their software licensing management portal and it was a mistake, the net effect was globally you've got now a 10 times increase in your call center load, which is really not a good trade-off. I was talking to Anshu, who's our solutions architect. So over the course of 4 years, we've developed 279,000 lines of code. 279,000. And I actually thought that was a lot, and Anshu was like, it is a lot, but he's obviously worked on some pretty heavy-duty projects in the past. The platform is used globally in about 30 countries. I know that looks like a Roman numeral, but we'll call that an artifact. And then in 2017, we've done 4 sprints, so continuous stream of improvement, both from the front end, the back end, several rounds of testing, internal testing with employees. We've pretty much gone through the gamut.
Yeah, and we started with 1 portal. Now we're on 3. So we went from managing 3 portals to then get it on some what we call a common platform where we can now manage it all in one place. We started out with a notion 4 years ago, and it's always one of the first questions we ask our clients. 9 times out of 10, we know the answer. Everything has to be responsive these days. And I think in the past 10, 12 years, that's all we have predominantly done. There are some outliers where we don't do it. But we were told in this scenario here that now everybody does our work with us from a desktop perspective. And about 2 years in, that of course changed. So for 2 years, we've now been working on taking 3 platforms and then all of a sudden re-engineer everything and now actually make it available on a mobile. And I think another thing to talk about with this client is when we started with them, I should actually say when Jamalto started with them, customer satisfaction scores were somewhere in the high 40s to low 50s, fluctuating a little bit up and down. And luckily, since we've been working with them and what we've been doing over the last 3 years, I think they're now in the 80%, which is great, which then means that they can focus on their business and their customer service teams have minimized and can actually now focus on continuing to do great work and improving their portals.
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, working with a client over that many years allows us to really understand their business. You know, a lot of the value that we can add for clients from a UX standpoint and a creative and a design standpoint really comes to understanding that exact software monetization DNA that makes your organization unique. Again, that's that there is no one size fits all. So coming in and really taking a focused look at all of the nuances of your particular organization, customer base, employees is absolutely critical in getting this right.
That's right. Understanding everything that you guys need to do from an internal perspective. There are conflicting messages that we get when we work with clients. Not everybody's on the same page, so we do that.
That's actually good, though. I mean, that's a point in time where, as a consultant, I can come in and say things that other people wouldn't necessarily be able to say for political reasons. So pointing out opportunities for improvement, never problems, and always phrasing that in a way to serve your customers better usually gets people thinking in the right way.
Yeah.
We're going to walk through a couple of myths and truths, except Bigfoot. We all know Bigfoot's real. But these are things that came up in the course of the last 4 years with this particular client, and they were sometimes unhappy surprises. So talking about them now, I think, and sharing that information is a good thing. So this is a point where we're going to have a poll. It's a B2B application, so we don't have users and we don't need to worry about UX. Yeah, that was a tough one.
Yeah.
Why are you here, Jason? Oops, we lost a page. There we go. So if you have humans interacting with your system, you have users. The reason why I wanted to put that up there, several years ago, I was doing a client workshop in Dallas, and This was a B2B application that we were developing for was managing workers' compensation claims. Very sexy. The lead client stood up when I was talking about users and content, and he said, okay, let me stop you right here, Jason, because we're a B2B application, so we don't have any users. So this whole UX stuff that you're talking about, we don't need any of that. And so we had a follow-up conversation about that, but I subsequently changed his mind. I think it was just sort of a knee-jerk reaction to things, but there is a tendency to believe that in the B2C versus a B2B world that you can feed the B2B folks whatever you want, and because they don't have a choice, they will just deal with it. The reality is that those employees are kind of like water. So water is unstoppable. It will find a way over, around, under, or through whatever you try to put in place that prevents them. So we've seen instances where people are managing multiple entitlements on behalf of another person, and rather than using the system, they're going to go and scrape all of those serial numbers out of 100 different emails and put them into a central email, and that's their way of working around a really bad software licensing management system. You really don't want your employees doing that. It's a big waste of time. A couple of stats. These are generally important. 88% of users less likely to return to a site after a bad experience. So think about when you're out online, you've just changed banks, you've gone to that bank's website, the online banking is horrible. Are you going to stay with that bank? Probably not. 94% of a user's impressions about a website are based on design. Well, of course they are, because we see it. It's right there in front of us. There's an interesting design principle. It's called the aesthetic usability effect. And the simple explanation of that, as my perception of the aesthetic value goes up, so too does my perception of the usability of that. So Apple is a past master of that. Martin's got an iPhone in his pocket. People buy iPhones because they like them. They feel good. I feel good using it. It's a well-designed product. That creates a lot of loyalty. It also creates a lot of forgiveness. So when you add design and UX to, for instance, your software licensing management portal, you are essentially helping people be a little more forgiving with the experience that they're going to have. Somebody had mentioned earlier that you can't do this all at once, so you have to roll things out incrementally and add complexity incrementally. So helping people by using design and UX to make that more effective, easier to scan, easier to use, easier to understand. Every dollar spent on UX brings between $2 and $100 in return. Oftentimes this is more of a cost avoidance issue, so we are avoiding having to do a lot of rework downstream because we've tested it, we've vetted it with users, and we have a high degree of confidence that whatever we're deploying out in the wild is actually going to work and be well received. So we'll go back to the old school analog here. Don't have to raise your hands, but your software licensing management portal will require about 5 to 10 basic HTML pages, 15 to 20 responsive HTML pages, or 30 plus very complicated pages optimized for desktop users. This was a funny one, mostly funny to us, because when we first started working with this client and we were approached, the initial scope, it's only about a half a dozen HTML pages, don't worry about it, it's not a problem. You guys could do this in a week. So I'm usually the lead hitter when we start a project, and I go through all of the requirements that our clients have. And that was a stack of requirements that was like that. So there was definitely more than a half a dozen HTML pages that were involved in that.
4 years later.
Yeah. Page counts are deceptive, especially when you start thinking in terms of today SPAs are a big thing. So single page applications where I've got essentially one page that has a dynamic area that's updated. Is that one page? Is that a new page every time you add that dynamic element? The complexity is there, and managing that can be difficult. With the client that we're working with now, I think they have, is it 8 licensing models? 12. All right, even more than I thought. So all of those licensing models determine the activation flow that I go through. Whether I hit the screen with a customer survey, whether I hit a screen where I can activate on behalf of another user, whether I can transfer or split entitlements. All of that stuff is very complicated. It's all happening inline on the page. I guess the point here to make really is that because of the level of complexity, get help with this. It's not easy to figure out, and we're professionals. We've done this for a long time. The plan for mobile thing is huge. So with this particular client, their initial strategy was that nobody is ever going to want to do this on a mobile device, which initially was true because we're dealing with large spreadsheets, lists of software entitlements, very small text. So if you want to go blind and be frustrated, that was sort of the thinking, then yeah, we'll put this on mobile. Flash forward 2 years later, oh my God, it has to be on mobile. That was our big thing last year, was converting this from a desktop-only application now to a mobile device. And also integrating it with a design system called Grommet. Grommet is a way of streamlining a user interface. So we had talked about minimalism and self-service and things like that as being on trend right now. And that whole idea of taking Grommet and applying that to even desktop sites or applications makes sense because everything ultimately is going to have to live in mobile. So if we start with that particular aesthetic, we're going to do a better job. So one more technology poll here. Software licensing management is a business process that does not require any content. Amen. That's right. The funny thing, though, is that, again, when we started this...
Whoa, wait a minute. We're going to give everybody a chance just to re-vote. No, I'm just kidding. It's actually going up.
Oops. So when we started working with this particular client, that was the mentality. Well, there's no content. We don't have any content that we need to create. And then it was, Earth, have we met? How are you going to train all of your internal employees? Are you going to have some sort of training program? Are you going to put together a demo? Are you going to put together a set of FAQs, contextual help? So if I'm in the middle of an activation flow, do I have to step out of that flow to get help? Or is there some sort of contextual inline help on the page that keeps me in the process and helps me complete that task? All of those internal content needs are non-trivial. Martin and I worked on a big project for Nike several years ago, and the training component of that was huge. That was all I did. Martin was actually running the product development component of that, and I was handling all of the internal training. So it was a massive amount of content that had to be created for that.
Yeah, I think now there's marketing surveys as well. So we're helping this client as well ask the right questions as people are working with the various portals and platforms and keep getting smarter. We have localized it as well, so it now lives in multiple languages as well. And I guess the point is that there is many pieces to the portal, and content is definitely one.
So last one, all the complexity associated with the software licensing management system is on the back end. I wonder if this is another one of my rhetorical questions.
I think everybody's starting to get the gist, but...
False.
Yeah.
It is definitely true that the back-end component of any software licensing management platform is going to be incredibly complicated. We've had a large team working on this for the last 4 years. Gemalto has a large team working on it as well. The front-end component of it is non-trivial, though. And it was interesting hearing, I don't remember who it was, but somebody had mentioned, I know what the word entitlement means now, so I feel like I'm moving ahead in my education. And software licensing management and software monetization in general uses a lot of words that people don't really understand. Your average customer has probably not necessarily heard the word entitlement before. So even explaining that and getting them into the language and the flow can be a challenge. Activation, renewal, managing licenses, those are all challenging processes, especially when you're dealing with a client like we have that's got 12 unique licensing models that all dynamically affect the potential 8-step activation flow. That's a big challenge. Yeah, Martin mentioned the international component of that, and that is a huge component as well.
Yeah, so not to try and simplify, but to drill it down a little bit. So what we spend our days on, weeks, months, and years, and what we have been doing in the 20-some years we've been doing this, is how do you take something very complex and just make it super easy to use? And it's very critical. We talk about user personas, right? A lot of the clients that we work with will have up until, some will have 8 to 12 to 14 user personas. How do we take 14 different needs-based personas, right, and make it all work on one page and make sure you deliver an experience that's going to work for multiple people that are there for various reasons. But it's been a great experience, and we love making complex businesses into, you've all heard the saying, it's easy to write a novel. I don't think it is, but I've heard that. It's really hard to write like a small little backflip page of it, of what the novel is about. What's really hard is to take like a little 2-line sentence and tell people what your book is about. That's really hard. So a little bit correlation with that, but.
I've really actually liked working on these projects. I've been doing this for 23 years, and I like projects that scare me. So
That's right.
If my first response is a colorful metaphor, how are we going to do that? Then I definitely want to be working on that. Yeah. So to just kind of wrap it up and leave some time for Q&A, audit your current efforts. That's kind of a no-brainer, but it's a big part of getting this right. Create a vision for the future state. So looking at all of your internal systems, where do you want to be 18, 24 months from now? Establish comprehensive requirements, functional requirements, content requirements, customer requirements. Understand all of your users, not just the customer-facing end of that, but also the internal people. So creating operational efficiency within the digital supply chain is a phrase that we've heard thrown around a lot, but you can't really do that unless you understand all of the internal challenges that you have. And the last one is, I do this too, get help from others. I mean, things change fast, so staying abreast of everything is almost impossible for one person to do. It's impossible for me to do, so I try to focus on things, and then I lean on others who are focused on other areas of UX. And I think at this point, we'll open up for some
We've got a couple
Q&A.
How important is localization?
If you're operating globally, it's critically important. The localization aspect is something that we plan out. So when we think about, for instance, I talked about that pilot program. That was a North America pilot program. We used that to hone it in and to really optimize it before we rolled it out to international markets. So there are some companies where we do that centrally. So all of that localization effort happens in one central location. Other companies take the approach of they utilize that local market team to create all the localized content for them. Either approach works. It's really just, do you have the boots on the ground in market to take care of that?
Yeah, but I think like Jason said, if you want to really be customer-centric, and you're operating from a global perspective, I think if you really want to cut down on customer support and have people understand, I think it needs to be localized.
One aspect that I didn't hear you comment on, but I think is quite important, is the iterative and life cycle of this kind of process. You talked about the content and how long it takes to develop it, but it's only too obvious that that content has to constantly evolve to keep in pace with what's happening, because those processes change.
Yes.
And it's one of the big frustrations to users to come in and you encounter something, you go look at the documentation, you go, well, that's not how this thing works.
Yeah, that is a problem, or not a problem, but a challenge. Managing the care and feeding of a software licensing management portal is not a small undertaking. Generally what we do is we try to maintain a continuous cycle of improvement. So we planned out for this year 4 sprints. Each of those sprints was about 3 months long, and that focused on different core areas. So at one point we integrated software evaluation into the licensing management portal. We integrated software support contracts into the portal. Every time we did that, we had to change the quick start guide, the FAQs, all of that stuff as well. So you just have to look at it as a package and then plan on updating the whole package every time you roll out a new iteration.
More questions?
So I thought it was interesting. One, I also want to congratulate you on having a coveted after lunch spot that everybody likes.
We wasn't sure if that was a benefit or not, if we had to wake people up.
Right. And from an engagement perspective, so you talked a lot about design, right? And
Yep.
so I just want to make sure I understood it right. For you, design is both aesthetics and structure.
Yeah, we actually break it out. So I would consider myself a functional designer. A lot of times when people ask me, well, what the heck does that mean? If we were building a skyscraper, I would make the blueprints. I'm not concerned about aesthetics, but I work with our creative director, Dave, and that's all he is focused on, is the aesthetics. But when I say aesthetics, I don't necessarily mean gratuitous design. I mean using palette, typography, and a visual vocabulary to make the whole system more usable. So it's less design in the consumer, wildly creative standpoint, and it's very focused, functional design.
Okay, so that takes to my next question, which is going back to globalization. So one aspect of localizing is just strings. The other aspect of localizing is considering cultural preferences
Local
or
markets.
biases.
Yep.
And so how do you create a single design in the structure sense of it and the flow and still achieve localization?
Well, I'm glad you asked.
Yeah.
We actually start with that basis in design. So we think about it as being a modular system where if I'm going to deploy something in Japan, there's obviously a huge difference from a cultural standpoint as it relates to palette, imagery. Kanji is read in a different way. You know, English is up here to here, top to bottom. All of those things have to be factored in when we start. So we're creating a modular system. We can update the palettes, the colors. We can update the typography. We can update the imagery, background colors. We just start from that standpoint if we're going to create Legos that make it really efficient to redo the front end and optimize it for a different market or a different type of user.
Okay, and you mentioned that you like to be scared, right?
Yeah.
So what kind of discount do I get?
Hey, you can talk to him.
It's going to be huge.
Yeah.
Thanks, Vince. Any other questions? Oh, wow, okay.
I'm just curious, you know, as you're developing the UX and the UI with your clients, how many clients are you seeing are actually starting to merge or better integrate their NPI, new product, new program introduction processes or product lifecycle processes with their IT product lifecycle or systems development lifecycle processes so that there is a more, I guess, engineering, product, strategy, go-to-market with the capabilities from a system perspective and then a policy or process perspective? Because it seems like all of these things touch all of those lenses, but are you seeing that integration and that merger of the different governance processes?
Not always. A lot of times it's a very sort of disparate set of things that have been glued together or, you know, chewing gum and baling wire. I think most companies understand the need to move in the direction that you're talking about. Somebody had mentioned earlier about you need to have your organizational alignment done before you start trying to push this out to customers, and that's always the challenge. Somebody else had mentioned, you know, it's a feudal environment. The UE, not the UTILE, but
Yeah.
that there are little fiefdoms, and so there is not always an incentive to cooperate internally. Again, sometimes that's where we can come in and help, because I can say things and do things that would get other people in trouble, but they're just sort of pointing out the pink elephant in the room, and the only reason why I do that is just to try to generate that organizational alignment and get that understanding for why all these things need to work together.
We're lucky, and some of the clients that we have worked with here lately in software monetization is that they're bringing all of the players to the table, and there is I would say, very decent alignment in terms of what they're trying to accomplish. But we can go back to the personas and the stakeholder interviews as well, right? As a consultant, we will normally come in and we will demand would be the wrong word, but we will feel
Strongly,
strongly
yeah.
about that we'll want to talk to everybody across the business and get a chance to talk to everybody and figure out what does the end goal mean to them, because like Jason mentioned, it is super important that we kind of like, we try and force you guys to think as far ahead as you can in terms of what the future state looks like, because the last thing we want to do is to go in and build something where we're going to sit down again and rethink it in 12 to 18 months, right? And these days it's really hard to think much further out than about 24 to 36 months, but we'll always try and make sure we talk to all stakeholders and try and think as far out as we can of knowing what the perfect state will look like in the future, and then build something that all the pieces might not be there from day one when we launch the first iteration, but at least we have thought of all of them and we haven't designed you into a dead end where we can add it later.
Yeah, and I mean, and just one more thing to add to that, all of that stuff that needs to happen organizationally is difficult, it's politically charged, there's all kinds of stuff that happens, but we can help you move in that direction.
So it sounds like a lot of the clients are still in the transformational project initiative with that executive sponsor, but then the next stage is how do you get it into business as usual? And so the next stage is integrating those life cycles together. It looks like a lot of clients aren't at that stage yet.
Yeah, and sometimes it's just taking a step back and looking at the totality of the workflow and getting rid of all the little dotted, international borders that keep people from, having a conversation about how we handle this or how we handle that.
All right, thanks.
So you guys are focused primarily on user experience and the flows, the information architecture, but you're still reliant on that data, right? The license and entitlement data coming from source systems and feeding. Do you guys build the entire stack, or the real question is, how many other teams are there that you have to coordinate with to actually deliver one of your releases, right? Because the impression is, hey, here we are, we're going to build this big thing, great company and big help for you, but all those other resources underlying,
yeah,
it's pretty significant.
There's a lot of herding cats that is involved in this. So what are we looking at, like 5, 6 different groups?
Yeah, probably more
within
than
this
that,
particular client example, but that may be excessive just because they're such a large company.
There's the big CRM systems. We got to get all the entitlements. We got to get all the data, and each client obviously deals with the data in different ways, have different sets of entitlements and data warehousing. We deal with their environments as well. And so, yeah, there's definitely a lot of pieces where I would say we're getting fairly close to working across the organization. And then, of course, there's the whole Gemalto side as well, right? So we got to take all those systems and make them all work, and we're a part of all of it. And, of course, we're not only doing UX, so meaning the front-end UX and design, right? We're also doing a lot of work on the technology side as well to make the portals work and to talk to all of those systems. So the focus of today, though, is around the user experience.
Thank you.
But did we answer the question okay? Or, yeah, okay.
Okay, we're going to try one more question just to stay on track.
I recall one of the slides you mentioned that the return of investment is 2x to 100x. Is that 100x just accidental, or if not, then how do you achieve that?
That's a good question. A lot of it comes down to what we had talked about in that definition phase, the define phase, setting up KPIs and metrics. And that can be about improving usage. It could be about upselling, cross-selling. Some of it is, as we mentioned, more of a cost avoidance issue. So if we think about taking something into development and putting it on a production server, a ton of work has already gone into that just to even get it to that point. If we can eliminate all of the potential errors before, or most of them, before we get there, that's really where that cost savings comes in. And then looking at, so for this particular client, we integrated software evaluation so I can download a 30-day trial. How do we monetize that? So how do we get people to go from a trial to a purchase. That's another way that we can give you a return on your investment.
Thank you, guys. And any more questions, we can use the app or just talk to
Yeah, we're around.
Stellar friends.
We're around
Thank you
until,
very
tomorrow.
much.
Thank you.